Every demon you know was once a god someone loved. The horned devil that haunts Christian nightmares. He was Pan, the Greek god of nature and fertility. The serpent that tempted Eve, sacred to dozens of ancient goddesses. The demons that medieval artists carved into cathedral stones. They wear the faces of deities that ruled human civilization for thousands of years before Christ was born. This is the story of history's greatest rebranding campaign, how Christianity didn't just replace the old religions, but transformed their gods into the very demons believers were taught to fear. So before we begin, hit that like button if you're ready to see religious history like never before, and let me know in the comments what you think about this transformation. To understand how this happened, we need to travel back to a time when the world knew thousands of gods instead of one devil. The temple stones remember what we have forgotten. In Uruk, where humanity first scratched words into clay, the ziggurat of Inanna rises into a sky that knows no single god. The goddess's temple prostitutes move through incense-thick air, their bodies sacred vessels for a divinity that encompasses both creation and destruction. Above them, carved in stone, Inanna holds the rod and ring of divine justice in one hand, while her other grips the severed head of her conquered enemy. She is beautiful. She is terrible. She is necessary. This is a world where gods bleed, here in the sweltering nights of ancient Mesopotamia, when the Euphrates runs red with silt and the wind carries the scent of burning offerings. No single deity claims dominion over the cosmos. Instead, they jostle and compete, love and war, create and destroy in an endless dance that mirrors the chaotic beauty of existence itself. The storm god Enlil ravages the earth with floods, not from malice, but from the simple fact that storms must storm. Ereshkigal rules the underworld not as punishment, but as inevitability. Every living thing must pass through her realm, and she receives them with the cold embrace of necessity. Death here is not evil, it is simply another face of the divine. The Mesopotamians understand something we have forgotten, that divinity contains multitudes. Their goddess Tiamat emerges from the primal waters as chaos incarnate, her serpentine form wreathing through the void before creation begins. When Marduk slays her, cleaving her body to form heaven and earth, the act is not good triumphing over evil. It is simply the eternal pattern, chaos becoming order, order returning to chaos, the wheel turning as it must turn. In the tomb temples of Egypt, the pattern repeats with different faces. Here, in chambers where gold catches torchlight like trapped stars, the god Set stalks through painted scenes of divine drama. His strange, dog-like head turns toward viewers with eyes that hold the fierce joy of desert storms. Set, who tears his brother Osiris apart in jealous rage. Set, who battles the falcon-headed Horus across the sky. Set, whom later ages will remember only as Satan. But in these painted chambers, Set is no devil. He is the necessary darkness that gives meaning to light, the drought that makes the flood precious, the violence that makes peace sacred. The pharaohs invoke his name not to curse their enemies, but to call upon the raw power that upholds the cosmic order. Even chaos serves the divine plan. The priests who tend these temples speak in voices rich with incense smoke. Set and Horus are one god, they whisper. Order and chaos, creation and destruction locked in eternal embrace. Neither can exist without the other. Neither is evil. Both are necessary. Across the wine-dark Mediterranean, in marble temples where olive oil burns in sacred lamps, the Greeks weave their own understanding of divine complexity. Here, Dionysus staggers through torchlit festivals, wine-drunk and wild, leading his maenads in ecstatic dance. His followers tear living flesh with their bare hands, lost in sacred frenzy. Blood stains their fingers. Divine madness burns in their eyes. This is not evil. This is holiness. The Greeks know their gods are not moral paragons, but cosmic forces made manifest. Zeus, king of Olympus, transforms into animals to seduce mortals, his divine lust as natural as lightning. Aphrodite drives heroes to their deaths with passion's fire. Ares revels in the clash of bronze on bronze, the beautiful terror of battle. They are gods precisely because they embody the full spectrum of existence, its beauty and horror, its creation and destruction, its order and chaos. Even death wears a complex face. Hades, lord of the underworld, sits upon his throne of bone and shadow, not as a demon, but as a necessary ruler of a necessary realm. His realm is not punishment, but transition. The dead who enter his kingdom do not suffer eternal torment. They simply continue their existence in a different form. The Greeks leave coins on their dead ones' eyes not to buy forgiveness, but to pay passage. Acknowledgement that death, like life, has its proper price. In the forests of northern Europe, where oak trees grow so thick that noon feels like twilight, the Celts carve antlers into standing stones and pour mead into sacred wells. They know the Morrigan, the triple goddess of war and prophecy, who appears sometimes as a woman, sometimes as a crow, sometimes as a wolf. She perches on battlefields feeding on carrion, her black feathers gleaming with fresh blood. Her cries foretell victory and death with equal measure. She is not evil, she is truth. The horned god they call Cernunnos sits cross-legged in their sacred groves, antlers branching like winter trees from his human brow. Animals gather around him, stag and serpent, boar and raven, drawn by his power over the wild places where civilization fears to tread. He is fertility and death entwined, the lord of the hunt and the guardian of the hunted, the god who governs the eternal cycle of birth, growth, decay, and rebirth. Future ages will see only his horns and remember only Satan. But here, in groves where mistletoe hangs like stars in ancient oak, he is the god who ensures that spring follows winter, that life follows death, that nothing is lost forever in the turning of the great wheel. Across the vast steppes and snow-locked forests of the north, where the aurora paints the sky in sheets of green fire, the Norse tell their own dark truths around hearth-fires that burn against the endless winter. Here, Loki shapeshifts through their stories, sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful, always necessary. He fathers monsters and saves gods, creates problems and solves them, embodies the chaotic creativity that keeps the cosmos from calcifying into sterile perfection. Even their vision of endings reveals the same pattern. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, comes not as defeat, but as transformation. The world burns, the gods die, but from the ashes, a new world grows, green and beautiful, populated by the children of the survivors. Destruction and creation, death and rebirth, the eternal cycle that governs all existence. This is the world before the devil, a world where divinity encompasses everything, where gods embody contradictions, where even darkness serves the sacred order. But something is stirring in the temples of a small desert tribe, something that will change everything. In Jerusalem, priests begin to speak of one God, only one God, a deity who tolerates no rivals and recognizes no equals. They whisper that all other gods are false, that the divine can wear only one face, speak with only one voice, demand only one kind of worship. They do not yet know what they are unleashing. They do not yet understand that when you declare war on multiplicity, you create something that never existed before, a cosmic enemy, a force of pure opposition, a devil who must exist because the one true God requires an adversary to define himself against. The old gods sense the shift. In their temples, the sacred fires flicker. In their groves, the wind carries the scent of change. In their painted chambers, shadows begin to gather where light once danced freely. They do not yet know they are about to become demons. But the transformation has already begun. In the minds of the faithful, in the words of the prophets, in the dreams of those who hunger for a simpler universe where good and evil never blur, never dance together, never remind mortals that divinity is vast and strange and morally complex. The temple stones remember what we have forgotten. But even stones, given enough pressure, enough heat, enough time, can be made to forget their original form. The devil is coming, not from hell, but from the necessity of human beings who cannot bear the complexity of the divine. And when he arrives, he will wear the faces of gods who once were loved, carrying the horns of fertility deities and the serpent wisdom of ancient goddesses, transformed now into symbols of everything the new faith must reject. The world before the devil is ending. The world that will forget its gods and remember only its demons is about to begin. The voice of the one God splits the desert silence like a blade through silk. In the scorching wastes where Abraham once heard the divine whisper, a new kind of faith takes root, one that tolerates no companions, suffers no equals, recognizes no divine complexity. Here, in tents that billow like dark sails against the endless sand, the Hebrew tribes begin to speak words that will reshape the world. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. One, singular, alone. The word falls like a stone into the cosmic pond, and ripples spread in all directions. For the first time in human history, divinity wears only one face, speaks with only one voice, demands exclusive worship from mortals who have known gods as numerous as stars. The implications will take centuries to unfold, but already the old certainties begin to crack. In the temple at Jerusalem, where incense burns before the ark of a God who has no image, priests recite words that make the air itself seem to tremble. You shall have no other gods before me. The phrase carries the weight of revolution, not, you shall worship me above all others. That would imply the others still exist. Not, you shall prefer me to all others. That would acknowledge their reality. But, you shall have no other gods. A declaration that rewrites the fundamental nature of divine existence. The Canaanite farmers working their fields beyond the temple walls do not yet understand what approaches. They pour wine offerings to Baal in hopes of rain, leave grain for Asherah at her sacred groves, burn incense to Moloch in times of desperate need. These are the gods their fathers served, their grandfathers served, stretching back through generations beyond counting. The gods who bring rain and fertility, who guard flocks and ensure harvest, who stand as intermediaries between mortal concerns and cosmic forces. But in the sacred texts now being scratched into scrolls by lamplight, these ancient deities undergo a terrible transformation. The scribes' reeds move across parchment like knives across flesh, carving new meanings into old names. Baal, the storm lord who rides the clouds and brings life-giving rain, becomes the detestable thing. His sacred bulls, once symbols of virile power, become golden calves worthy only of destruction. His mountaintop shrines where families have brought their prayers for generations become high places that must be torn down, their stones scattered like broken bones. Asherah, the mother goddess whose sacred trees shelter travelers and whose groves offer sanctuary to women in childbirth, becomes the abomination. Her wooden poles, carved with symbols of fertility and growth, must be cut down and burned. Her priestesses, once respected healers and midwives, become temple prostitutes, whose very existence offends the one God's holiness. Moloch, the divine king, whose bronze arms once received desperate offerings from parents facing famine and plague, becomes the ultimate horror. The sacred fires where the most precious gifts were given to ensure the community's survival become infernal furnaces of child sacrifice. What was once holy reciprocity, the most beloved given to save the many, becomes the most heinous sin imaginable. The transformation cuts deeper than names and images. It rewrites the fundamental grammar of the divine. Where once the gods formed a complex ecosystem of competing and complementary powers, now there can be only one true deity and countless false pretenders. Where once divine conflict represented cosmic balance, order and chaos, creation and destruction locked in eternal dance, now it becomes warfare between absolute good and absolute evil. In Deuteronomy, the scribes write words that burn across parchment like acid. They sacrificed to demons, not to God, to gods they had not known. Demons. The word appears for the first time, creating a new category of existence. The gods of the nations are not simply foreign or different. They are actively malevolent entities, fallen powers that seduce mortals away from truth. The Hebrew word shadim appears in the text like a crack in reality itself. Neither angels nor men, neither natural forces nor divine emanations, but something new and terrible, spiritual beings whose very existence serves as opposition to the one true God. The cosmic ecosystem begins to divide into armies, those who serve the light and those who serve the darkness, with no middle ground, no neutrality, no complex loyalties possible. But even as the Hebrew scribes create their theological revolution, the seeds of an even more radical transformation are already germinating. Across the ancient world, a Persian prophet named Zoroaster speaks of cosmic warfare that makes even Hebrew monotheism seem moderate by comparison. In fire temples where sacred flames burn eternal, Persian magi tell of Ahura Mazda, the wise lord of light, locked in ultimate battle against Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit of darkness. Here, the moral universe achieves perfect clarity. Every thought, every word, every deed serves either the forces of truth and light, or the powers of falsehood and shadow. No gods dance between categories. No deities embody contradictions. No divine figures serve both creation and destruction. The cosmic war has begun, and every soul must choose a side. This dualistic vision spreads like wildfire through mystery cults and philosophical schools. In the teachings of early Gnostic groups, the material world itself becomes a prison created by a false god, a cosmic mistake that traps divine sparks in corrupted flesh. In Manichaean communities, initiates learn to see reality as a battlefield where particles of light struggle to escape the contamination of darkness. The old gods find themselves conscripted into this cosmic army, whether they will or no. Deities who once embodied both creative and destructive powers must choose allegiance, serve the light or serve the darkness. There is no third option. The middle ground where they once danced has been declared enemy territory. In Alexandria, where Greek philosophy meets Hebrew theology in wine-soaked debates that last until dawn, early Christian theologians begin the work that will reshape the world. Men with names like Tertullian, Augustine, and Irenaeus take stylus to wax tablet and begin writing words that will echo through centuries. Tertullian, his face gaunt from fasting, his eyes burning with converts' fervor, writes by oil lamp in the pre-dawn darkness. What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? What concord is there between the academy and the church? His words slice through the night air like a sword. The ancient wisdom, the philosophical traditions, the mystery religions that have guided human souls for millennia, all must be swept away. There can be no compromise with error, no accommodation with falsehood. In his cell, Augustine wrestles with memories of his pagan youth, the Manichaean teachings that once filled his mind, the philosophical debates that shaped his thinking. But when his reed moves across parchment, the words that emerge leave no room for the old complexity. All gods of the nations are demons. The pronouncement falls like a final judgment. Jupiter, once king of gods, becomes a fallen angel. Venus, once goddess of love, becomes a tempter of souls. Mercury, once messenger between worlds, becomes a deceiver of minds. The theological machinery of demonization builds momentum with each passing year. Irenaeus catalogues heresies like a physician cataloguing diseases, each deviation from orthodox truth a symptom of demonic infection. The Gnostics, who claim secret knowledge, the Marcionites, who reject the Hebrew scriptures, the Montanists, who prophesy in ecstatic tongues, all become servants of the great adversary, whether they know it or not. But the most crucial transformation is yet to come. In 313 AD, Emperor Constantine stands before the Milvian Bridge, his eyes fixed on a vision in the sky. A cross of light bearing the words, "In this sign, conquer." Behind him, his legions carry standards that bear the sacred symbols of Rome, eagles clutching thunderbolts, images of Sol Invictus, the faces of divine emperors. By nightfall, many of these symbols will be torn down, melted down, forgotten. The Edict of Milan arrives like a dawn that burns away stars. Religious tolerance, Constantine proclaims, but his gold flows toward Christian churches, while pagan temples find their state subsidies mysteriously withdrawn. His new capital rises at Constantinople, with churches at its heart, while the old temples of Byzantium crumble into foundations for Christian basilicas. The transformation accelerates. What began as theological argument becomes imperial policy. The Council of Nicaea gathers in 325 AD, bishops arriving from every corner of the empire to settle questions that will determine the fate of souls. In rooms thick with incense and heavy with the weight of decision, they argue over words like homoousios and hypostasis. But beneath the theological precision lies a simpler truth. There will be one church, one faith, one interpretation of the divine will. All others are heresy. All others are dangerous. All others must be silenced. The codices that emerge from Nicaea carry within their bindings the death sentences of countless gods. The books that are approved become scripture. The books that are rejected become forbidden knowledge. The Gospel of Thomas, with its sayings about finding the kingdom within, disappears into desert caves. The Acts of John, with its cosmic Christ who dances the universe into being, is consigned to flames. The thunder, perfect mind, where a goddess speaks in paradoxes about being both honored and scorned, virgin and whore, becomes whispered heresy. What survives the purge is carefully edited to support the new cosmic order. The Satan of the Hebrew scriptures, once merely the adversary, a divine prosecutor who tested human faithfulness on God's behalf, begins to expand into something far more sinister. The serpent of Eden, the tempter of Job, the opponent who sifts the faithful like wheat, gradually merge into a single cosmic enemy, the fallen angel who leads a rebellion against heaven itself. But the most profound change is philosophical. The ancient world knew gods who were neither fully good nor fully evil, deities who embodied the complexity and contradiction of existence itself. The new world demands moral clarity. Good and evil become cosmic armies with no deserters, no neutrals, no complex loyalties. Every supernatural being must choose a side. Every spiritual power serves either God or Satan, light or darkness, salvation or damnation. The old gods watch from their abandoned temples as the world remakes itself around them. They do not yet know they are about to become demons. They do not yet understand that their complexity, their contradictions, their embodiment of both creative and destructive forces will be precisely the qualities that damn them in the new order. In Rome, the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, once the heart of imperial religion, stands empty as weeds grow through cracks in its marble floor. In Greece, the oracle at Delphi falls silent as her priests flee or convert. In Egypt, the temple of Isis at Philae continues its ancient rites, but the worshippers grow fewer each year, greyer, more afraid. The monotheistic revolution is complete. The cosmic ecosystem that once sustained thousands of gods has been replaced by a binary system that recognizes only two kinds of spiritual power: divine and demonic, holy and evil, saved and damned. The old gods are about to discover which category they have been assigned, and in that discovery, they will become something they never were before: enemies of humanity, tempters of souls, servants of the ultimate darkness that opposes the ultimate light. The world of many gods is dying. The world of one god and countless demons is about to be born. And in that birth, something essential about the divine nature of reality will be lost forever. The understanding that the sacred encompasses both light and shadow, that holiness includes both creation and destruction, that even darkness can serve the dance of existence. The monotheists have won. Now they must face the consequences of their victory. The first horn, carved into cathedral stone, carries within it the memory of a god's death. In the scriptorium of the monastery at Cluny, Brother Aldrich bends over his illuminated manuscript, his reed pen trembling as he traces the outline of a creature that haunts his dreams. Goat legs, human torso, crowned with branching horns, the image takes shape beneath his careful strokes like a thing clawing its way out of hell itself. This is Satan, he tells himself, the great deceiver, the enemy of souls. But sometimes, in the moments between waking and sleep, he remembers another name whispered in the old tongue: Pan. The transformation is complete, but the memory bleeds through like paint applied too thin over an older canvas. 500 years earlier, in the sun-dappled groves of Arcadia, Pan's reed pipes had made the very stones dance with joy. Shepherds left honey cakes at his woodland shrines, their prayers rising with the smoke of burning herbs. Grant us fat sheep, great God, grant us milk-heavy goats. Let the she-wolves find other prey. His laughter echoed through valleys where wild thyme grew thick as carpet, where streams ran silver over moss-green rocks, where life and death danced together in the eternal rhythm of the natural world. Pan was desire without shame, the mounting ram, the rutting stag, the sap rising in spring trees. His worship was the gasp of lovers in hidden glades, the sweat of farmers planting seed, the blood of women bringing forth children in the sacred darkness before dawn. He was the God who reminded civilized men that they were animals, that their flesh was clay mixed with starlight, that their deepest hungers were holy. But holiness, Brother Aldrich has learned, must be redefined. The Church has taught him new words for old truths: concupiscence, carnal appetite, fleshly corruption. The desires that once made Pan's followers dance naked in moonlit festivals now require confession, penance, purification. The body that was once a temple has become a battleground where soul wars against flesh for mastery. And so Pan's horns, once symbols of virility and natural power, become the crown of the great tempter. His goat legs, once signs of his kinship with the wild places, become proof of his bestial nature. His reed pipes, once instruments of joy, become the music that lures souls to damnation. The god of the life force becomes the enemy of the living. The metamorphosis spreads through art and story like plague through a city. In the margins of psalters, scribes draw devils with Pan's face. In sermons preached from marble pulpits, priests describe the horned one who whispers of fleshly pleasures in the ears of the faithful. In mystery plays performed in cathedral squares, actors don goat masks and caper obscenely, their performances teaching congregations to laugh at what their ancestors once revered. But Pan is not alone in his damnation. Across the dark forests of Gaul and Germania, where oak trees grow so ancient their roots touch the bones of giants, another horned god undergoes the same terrible transformation. The Celts called him Cernunnos, the Horned One, and carved his image on silver cauldrons that caught moonlight like captured stars. There he sits, cross-legged in the eternal posture of meditation, his antlers branching into the sky like the world tree itself. Around him the animals gather, stag and serpent, boar and wolf, bull and ram, drawn by the power that flows from him like water from a spring. He is the God who rules the spaces between wild and tame, between life and death, between the world of men and the realm of spirits. In the sacred groves where his altars stood, druids poured mead and blood onto earth that drank deep and gave back abundance. Warriors brought their weapons to be blessed by his power. Women heavy with child sought his protection in the dangerous passage between worlds. He was the God of transformations, the Lord of all boundaries crossed, the guardian of the gates between one state of being and another. But transformation, the monks now preach, is the devil's specialty. The serpent in Eden was a shapeshifter. The demons that tempt hermits in the desert appear as beautiful women, as angels of light, as whatever form will best deceive their victims. And so Cernunnos, the god of sacred change, becomes Satan the deceiver, the false angel who appears as light to lead souls into darkness. His antlers become demonic horns. His sacred animals become the devil's beasts. His cross-legged posture of meditation becomes the mocking pose of Baphomet, the idol that later ages will claim the Templars' worship in their secret rites. The god who helped souls navigate the dangerous passages of existence becomes the one who blocks their path to salvation. In the monasteries where monks copy ancient texts by candlelight, scribes carefully edit the old stories. Wherever gods transform themselves, the transformations become deceptions. Wherever deities appear in animal form, the forms become proof of their demonic nature. Wherever the old religions speak of sacred sexuality, the sexuality becomes corruption. Wherever the ancient wisdom teaches that divinity encompasses both light and shadow, the shadow is surgically removed and assigned to Satan. The Malleus Maleficarum, that catalogue of demonic horrors compiled by inquisitors who smell witchcraft in every herb garden, describes the devil's appearance with clinical precision. He appears as a goat, walking upright upon his hind legs, with horns upon his head and a beard upon his chin. The description could serve equally well for Pan or Cernunnos, for any of a dozen fertility gods whose crime was teaching mortals that flesh could be sacred, that desire could be holy, that the body was not the enemy of the spirit, but its partner in the dance of existence. But the transformation cuts deeper than individual gods. The entire mythology of the horned god, the archetype that appears in cultures around the world, from the Celtic Cernunnos to the Hindu Pashupati, to the Greek Pan, undergoes systematic demonization. The horned deity, who once represented the life force itself, becomes the ultimate symbol of spiritual death. In medieval art, the metamorphosis becomes visible in pigment and gold leaf. The earliest Christian representations of demons show them as fairly human creatures, perhaps with small horns or slightly distorted features. But as the centuries pass, as the memory of the old gods grows more distant, the demonic imagery becomes more elaborate, more monstrous, more obviously derived from pagan iconography. The devil in Giotto's Last Judgment is a massive, three-headed creature, devouring souls in his multiple mouths, an image that recalls both the three-faced Hecate of the Crossroads and the multi-headed demons of Hindu cosmology. The Satan in medieval manuscripts sprouts goat legs, bear's claws, serpent tails, and eagle wings. A composite creature that brings together attributes from dozens of animal-headed gods from cultures across Europe and beyond. The green men carved in cathedral stonework tell the same story in reverse. These foliate faces, peering from between stone leaves with eyes that hold forest wisdom, appear on the very churches that preach against pagan nature worship. The carvers perhaps remember what the priests try to forget, that the sacred lives in leaf and branch, in the turning of seasons, in the endless cycle of growth and decay that governs all living things. But even these stone memories are reinterpreted. The green men become grotesques, decorative warnings about the chaos that lurks outside the ordered world of Christian civilization. Their vine-wrapped faces become masks worn by demons to seduce the faithful back into the dark woods where Satan's worship continues in secret groves and midnight Sabbaths. The fauns and satyrs of classical mythology undergo their own transformation in the alembic of Christian imagination. Once they were minor woodland deities, mischievous but essentially harmless spirits who played music, chased nymphs, and danced in meadows where wildflowers grew thick as stars. Their goat legs marked them as children of Pan. Their small horns identified them as spirits of the wild places that lay beyond the boundaries of human settlement. In Christian iconography, they become devil's apprentices, lesser demons who served the great Satan in his war against humanity. Their pipes, once instruments of natural joy, become the music that summons witches to their Sabbaths. Their dancing, once celebration of the life force, becomes the obscene capering of creatures who mock everything holy. Their sexuality, once symbol of nature's generative power, becomes evidence of their corruption and their power to corrupt others. The transformation is so complete that by the medieval period, most Christians cannot imagine the horned god as anything but evil. When missionaries encounter indigenous peoples who worship horned deities, they immediately identify these gods as Satan or his demons. The Aztec Tlazolteotl, goddess of fertility and purification, becomes a devil because of her association with sexuality and transformation. The African horned masks used in initiation ceremonies become devil worship in the eyes of European colonizers. The Hindu Shiva, dancing the universe into existence with his cosmic rhythm, is denounced as a demon by Christian missionaries, who see only his third eye and his serpent ornaments. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurs not in the realm of theology, but in the realm of psychology. The horned god, in his original form, represented the integration of civilization and wildness. The acknowledgement that human beings are both rational spirits and animal bodies, that the soul requires both discipline and ecstasy, both order and chaos, to achieve wholeness. When the horned god becomes Satan, this integration becomes impossible. The wild self must be suppressed, denied, cast out. The body becomes the enemy of the spirit. Desire becomes temptation. The natural world becomes a realm of corruption from which the faithful must be saved. Carl Jung, writing centuries later with the cool precision of psychological analysis, will identify what the medieval monks could not see. The devil is the ape of God, his shadow side, his dark brother. But the shadow, Jung understands, is not evil. It is simply the rejected aspect of the self, the qualities that consciousness cannot accept, and so projects onto an external enemy. The horned god becomes Satan, not because he is evil, but because the qualities he represents, wildness, sexuality, transformation, the integration of light and shadow, cannot be accommodated within a dualistic system that demands moral clarity. He must be demonized because he cannot be denied, cannot be destroyed, cannot be forgotten. He lives on in the collective unconscious, in dreams and fantasies, in the sudden stirring of desire that reminds even the most devout Christian that they are not pure spirit but flesh and blood, not angels but animals touched by the divine. And so the horns remain, carved in stone and painted in manuscript margins, cast in bronze for church doors and etched in glass for cathedral windows. They carry within them the memory of gods who danced in firelight, who blessed the coupling of lovers, who taught that the sacred could be found in sweat and laughter, in the meeting of eyes across a crowded festival, in the gasp of pleasure that rises like prayer toward a sky full of stars. The Church has won its war against the horned god, has transformed him from deity to demon, from object of worship to source of terror. But victories in wars against gods are always Pyrrhic. The energy does not disappear, it simply changes form, goes underground, emerges in unexpected places. In the dreams of monks, Pan still plays his pipes. In the confessions of the faithful, Cernunnos still offers his forbidden wisdom. In the deep woods where no churches have been built, the horned god still dances, waiting for the wheel to turn again, waiting for humanity to remember what it has chosen to forget. That wholeness requires the integration of all aspects of the self, that the spirit needs its shadow, that even devils were once gods who blessed the marriage of heaven and earth. The horns remember what the churches teach us to forget, and in that memory lies both damnation and salvation, both the fall from grace and the path back to the garden where all beings, horned and human alike, dance together in the eternal celebration of existence. The last priestess of Hecate dies with blood on her lips and secrets in her eyes. In the year 391 AD, when Christian mobs storm the temple of Serapeum in Alexandria, the ancient woman who tends Hecate's shrine in the temple's hidden chambers refuses to flee. She has served the triple goddess for 60 years, has watched the moon wax and wane through 740 cycles, has delivered children and prepared the dead for their journey to the underworld. Her hands know the weight of silver keys, the texture of sacred herbs, the ritual gestures that open doorways between worlds. The soldiers find her kneeling before the goddess's statue, her lips moving in prayers older than Rome itself. The bronze Hecate towers above her, three-formed, three-faced, holding torches that cast dancing shadows on walls, painted with scenes of divine mysteries. One face looks toward the past, one toward the present, one toward the future. All three faces know what approaches. Witch, the captain spits, his sword already bloodied from the slaughter of priests in the outer chambers. Devil worshipper, servant of Satan. The old woman looks up with eyes that hold the wisdom of crossroads, walked in darkness, of births attended in the dangerous hours before dawn, of souls guided through the gates of death. She speaks in Greek thick with the accent of old Alexandria. I serve the one who was ancient when your God was yet unborn. I serve the light-bringer, the key-holder, the guardian of thresholds. The sword falls. Blood pools on marble floors where frankincense once burned. But as her life flows away, the priestess smiles, for she knows what the soldiers do not, that goddesses, unlike mortal women, cannot be killed with steel. They can only be transformed, and Hecate's transformation has already begun. In the monasteries where monks struggle to make sense of the old myths, scribes work by candlelight to rewrite the stories of the triple goddess. Where ancient texts speak of Hecate Kladuchos, holder of the keys to all mysteries, the new versions describe a demon who unlocks doors that should remain sealed. Where the old hymns praise Hecate Phosphoros, the lightbringer who guides travelers through darkness, the revised accounts tell of a false luminary who leads souls astray. Where temple inscriptions honor Hecate Propylaea, guardian of gateways, Christian commentaries warn of a creature who stands at crossroads to offer diabolic pacts to the unwary. The goddess who once helped women birth children becomes the demon who kills them in their cribs. The deity who guided souls safely through the underworld becomes the witch queen who traps them there forever. The light-bearer becomes the mother of shadows. But Hecate is not the only goddess to undergo this terrible metamorphosis. Across the ancient world, wherever the divine feminine once reigned supreme, the transformation spreads like fire through dry grass. In Mesopotamia, where the goddess Inanna once descended to the underworld and returned triumphant, breaking the gates of death itself, her story is rewritten in darker ink. The queen of heaven and earth, who held the rod and ring of cosmic authority, who wore the crown of the goddess and walked between worlds as sovereign of both life and death, becomes Lilith. The night demon, the child killer, the succubus who steals the seed of sleeping men. The transformation cuts deeper than name and nature. The sacred marriage, the hierosgamos where goddess and king united to ensure the fertility of the land, becomes demonic seduction. The temple courtesans who embodied the goddess's sacred sexuality, whose union with worshippers was sacrament rather than sin, become whores in service to Satan. The priestesses who spoke prophecy in the goddess's voice become witches whose words carry curses rather than blessings. In the scriptorium of the monastery at Tours, Brother Marcus puzzles over a passage in the Book of Revelation as rain drums against leaded windows. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations. The whore of Babylon, the woman who rides the beast, who corrupts the nations, who must be destroyed before the New Jerusalem can descend from heaven. Brother Marcus dips his reed in fresh ink and begins to illuminate the margin with careful brush strokes. As the image takes shape beneath his hand, he finds himself painting features he has seen before, not in visions of apocalypse, but in fragments of classical statuary, in coins that bear the image of Cybele, the Great Mother, in mosaics that show Isis crowned with stars. The connection forms in his mind like revelation itself. The divine feminine that ruled the pagan world, the goddess who was mother and lover, virgin and crone, creator and destroyer. She has not disappeared. She has been split, divided, her light aspects assigned to Mary the Virgin Mother, and her shadow aspects cast into the abyss as the great enemy of all that is holy. Mary Theotokos, God-bearer, clothed with the sun and crowned with 12 stars, becomes the acceptable face of the feminine divine. But even her image must be carefully controlled, her power strictly limited. She may intercede, but not command. She may nurture, but not rule. She may suffer, but not rage. The wild, autonomous, sexually empowered goddess, who once shook heaven and earth with her passions, is transformed into the meek handmaiden who speaks only to say, "Be it done unto me according to thy word." But what happens to the rejected aspects? Where does the goddess's power go when it is severed from her sanctified image? Into the shadows, into the forests, into the bodies of mortal women who remember, however dimly, that once their sex was sacred, that once the feminine principle was divine rather than subordinate, that once women spoke with the authority of goddesses rather than the permission of priests. The witch trials that will sweep Europe in centuries to come have their theological foundation laid in these early Christian centuries, in the systematic demonization of the goddess and all her works. The Malleus Maleficarum, that encyclopedia of feminine evil, describes with clinical precision the ways in which women serve Satan, through their sexuality, their knowledge of herbs and healing, their ability to bring forth life, their connection to the cycles of moon and season. Every attribute that once made the goddess sacred now becomes evidence of demonic allegiance. Isis, who knew the secret names of power and could heal with a word, becomes the archetypal sorceress whose knowledge comes from congress with devils. Artemis, who ruled the hunt and protected women in childbirth, becomes Diana of the witches' Sabbath, the demon queen who leads the wild hunt through midnight skies. Bridget, the triple goddess of poetry, smithcraft and healing, survives only by being transformed into Saint Bridget, her powers safely contained within Christian orthodoxy. But transformation is never complete. In the countryside of Ireland, where mists rise from ancient bogs and stone circles stand like sentinels against the sky, the people still leave milk at Bridget's wells. They still light fires on her feast day, still recite blessings that are older than Patrick's mission. They call her saint now rather than goddess, but their hands remember the same gestures their ancestors used. Their voices carry the same rhythms. Their hearts hold the same reverence for the feminine power that flows through earth and season, birth and death. In the Jewish mystical traditions that develop alongside Christianity, the feminine divine undergoes a different but equally profound transformation. The Shekinah, the divine presence that dwelt in the temple, that accompanied Israel through the wilderness, that manifested as the pillar of cloud and fire, becomes an exile. She is split from the masculine aspect of God, cast out into the world of shells and shadows, condemned to wander among the nations until the cosmic repair, tikkun, reunites the divided aspects of the divine. The Zohar, that mystical commentary on scripture written in the language of erotic yearning, describes the cosmic tragedy in terms that would be familiar to any priestess of Inanna. The Holy One, blessed be He, has no joy in His world since the day the temple was destroyed and the Shekinah went into exile. The king is without the queen, and the queen is without the king. But even in exile, the Shekinah retains her dangerous power. She appears to mystics as a beautiful woman, whose embrace can either elevate the soul to divine union or destroy it utterly. She is Lilith's sister and shadow, the sacred feminine that must be approached with ritual purity and perfect preparation, lest her fire consume rather than illuminate. The Christian tradition develops its own version of the dangerous feminine in the figure of Sophia, divine wisdom, who appears in the apocryphal text that barely survived the canonical purges. In the Thunder Perfect Mind, she speaks in paradoxes that recall the voice of Inanna herself. I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. But such texts become forbidden knowledge, consigned to desert caves or Gnostic communities that practice their mysteries in secret. The Sophia who encompasses contradictions, who is both virgin and whore, mother and destroyer, cannot be contained within orthodox theology. She must be suppressed, her scrolls burned, her followers scattered. What survives in the mainstream tradition is carefully edited. Wisdom becomes a literary personification rather than a divine person. The feminine aspects of the divine are safely channeled into Marian devotion, where the Mother of God may be honored but never approached as an autonomous divine force. The dangerous knowledge that once made women priestesses and prophets becomes the devil's snare, evidence of demonic deception rather than divine revelation. But in the hidden places, the memory persists. In the folklore of European villages, where old women still know which herbs ease childbirth and which phases of the moon are best for planting. In the fairy tales where Baba Yaga and the witch in the gingerbread house embody both the nurturing and devouring aspects of the Great Mother. In the folk songs where beautiful women lure men to their deaths in wells and rivers, echoing older stories of water goddesses who demanded sacrifice in exchange for their blessings. The Renaissance brings a brief resurgence of the goddess's power, carefully disguised as classical learning. Botticelli's Venus rises from foam that carries within it the memory of Aphrodite's birth. Leonardo's mysterious women, the Mona Lisa, the Lady with an Ermine, smile with the secret knowledge that once belonged to sibyls and priestesses. Michelangelo's sibyls in the Sistine Chapel speak prophecy with voices that echo from Delphi and Cumae. But even this revival must walk carefully. Venus may be painted, but not worshipped. The classical goddesses may inspire art, but not devotion. They are safely dead, transformed into literary metaphors rather than living powers. The witch trials of the early modern period represent the last great purge of the goddess's surviving influence. From 1450 to 1750, across Catholic and Protestant Europe alike, an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people, mostly women, are executed for the crime of witchcraft. The charges are almost always the same: consorting with the devil, attending Sabbaths, practicing maleficent magic, corrupting the natural order. But beneath the theological language lie older accusations. The women who burn are often healers, midwives, herb wives, wise women who carry knowledge passed down through generations of mothers and daughters. They know when to plant by moon phases, how to ease difficult births, which plants can prevent or cause pregnancy, how to speak to the spirits that dwell in wells and groves and ancient stones. This is the goddess's knowledge, the wisdom that once made women sacred rather than suspect. But in a world where the feminine divine has been cast into darkness, such knowledge becomes diabolic rather than divine. The woman who eases pain becomes the witch who causes it. The midwife who brings life becomes the child killer who takes it. The healer becomes the poisoner. The wise woman becomes the deceiver. The priestess becomes the whore. Isabella Gowrie burns in Edinburgh in 1595, her crime the knowledge of herbs that her grandmother taught her. Margaret Jones hangs in Boston in 1648 for the sin of successful healing. Anna Goldie dies in Switzerland in 1782, the last woman officially executed for witchcraft in Europe. Her crime, the ancient one of knowing more about the natural world than her male accusers deemed safe. Each death is both an ending and a continuation. The knowledge goes underground, survives in whispers, in recipes passed from mother to daughter, in prayers spoken in kitchens where no priest can hear. The goddess dies in her priestesses, but lives on in the collective memory of what was lost, what was forbidden, what might someday be reclaimed. Carl Jung, writing in the cool precision of psychological analysis, identifies what the witch hunters could not acknowledge. The anima, the feminine aspect of the unconscious, becomes demonic when it is repressed and rejected. The goddess becomes Satan's bride, not because she is evil, but because she cannot be denied, cannot be destroyed, cannot be forgotten. She lives on in dreams and fantasies, in the sudden stirring of feminine power that reminds even the most patriarchal society that the female is not merely the absence of the male, not simply the vessel for masculine seed, but a divine force in her own right. The wheel turns. In the late 20th century, the goddess begins her return. Women reclaim the names that were forbidden, Hecate, Inanna, Isis, Brigid, and speak them not as demons, but as aspects of the divine feminine that patriarchal religions sought to destroy. They gather in circles under the full moon, light candles on altars decorated with symbols that would have sent their ancestors to the stake, speak prayers in the ancient tongue of women's mysteries. The witch is no longer Satan's servant, but the goddess's daughter, reclaiming the power that was stolen, the wisdom that was forbidden, the knowledge that was buried beneath centuries of fear and shame. The horned god and the triple goddess dance together again in suburban living rooms and wilderness clearings, in bookstores and university classrooms, in the dreams of women who remember, however dimly, that once they were priestesses, once they were oracles, once their bodies were temples, rather than sources of sin. The goddess rises from the ashes of her own burning. The witch queen reclaims her crown. The divine feminine, split for centuries between virgin and whore, saint and demon, begins the long work of making herself whole again. But that is a story for another age, another turning of the wheel. For now, it is enough to remember that every devil was once divine, that every demon carries within herself the memory of godhood, that the witch who burns carries in her flesh the sacred fire that no persecution can extinguish. The last priestess of Hecate died with secrets in her eyes, but secrets, unlike flesh, cannot be killed with swords. They live on in the darkness, waiting for the crossroads, waiting for the moon, waiting for the daughters who will remember her name and speak it without fear, transforming curse back into blessing, demon back into deity, witch back into goddess. The keys to the mysteries were never lost. They were only hidden, waiting for hands brave enough to turn them, waiting for voices strong enough to speak the words of power, waiting for hearts wise enough to know that what was demonized was not destroyed, but only driven underground, where it grew stronger in the darkness, preparing for its inevitable return. The cross falls like a shadow across the sacred grove, and where it lands, gods become demons. In the year 772 AD, Charlemagne's axes bite into the Irminsul. the great pillar that the Saxons believe holds up the sky. The tree trunk groans as it topples, its fall echoing through forests where Germanic tribes have worshipped for generations beyond counting. Birds rise in startled clouds from branches that have heard 10,000 prayers, witnessed countless sacrifices, sheltered the rituals that bind earth to heaven in the endless dance of seasons. The Frankish soldiers cheer as the sacred wood crashes to the forest floor, but their Saxon captives weep tears that fall like blood onto roots that drank the offerings of their ancestors. They know what the Christians do not yet understand, that when you kill a people's gods, you wound something deeper than flesh, something that may never heal. But Charlemagne has read his Augustine, his Gregory, his Jerome. He knows that Christ's kingdom must be built on the ruins of pagan error, that the old gods must be cast down before the new faith can take root. The Capitulatio de Partibus Saxoniae that his scribes draft by candlelight makes the theology of conquest explicit. Death to any Saxon who refuses baptism. Death to any who make offerings to demons. Death to any who follow the customs of their fathers, rather than the laws of their new Christian king. The demons, of course, are the gods the Saxons have always known. Woden, the All-Father, who hung himself from the world tree to gain wisdom. Thor the Thunderbearer, whose hammer protects Midgard from the giants of chaos. Freya the Satyr Queen, whose magic governs fertility and death. These deities, who guided Saxon tribes through migrations and battles, who blessed their harvests and marriages, who received their dead into halls of honor, are now proclaimed enemies of all that is holy. The transformation is swift and merciless. Woden's ravens, once messengers carrying knowledge between the worlds, become the black birds that serve Satan in his war against heaven. Thor's hammer, once the symbol that protected hearth and home, becomes a demonic mockery of the Christian cross. Freya's amber tears, once symbols of divine sorrow that blessed mortal love, become the false gold with which the devil buys souls. But the Saxons are only the beginning. Across Europe, from the fog-shrouded moors of Scotland to the olive groves of Spain, the same pattern repeats with mechanical precision. Wherever Roman legions march, wherever Frankish cavalry charge, wherever Christian missionaries plant their wooden crosses in pagan soil, the ancient gods undergo their inevitable metamorphosis from protector to persecutor, from benefactor to demon. In Ireland, where mists rise from sacred wells and stone circles stand like doorways to the otherworld, St. Patrick arrives carrying more than just the gospel. His Confessio speaks of dreams where Irish voices cry out for salvation. But his deeds reveal a different truth: the systematic destruction of a culture that has flourished for millennia without need of Christian redemption. The Druids who once memorized 10,000 lines of sacred poetry, who served as judges and healers, who mediated between the human world and the realm of spirits, are denounced as devil worshippers whose knowledge comes from congress with demons. Their sacred groves are cut down, their stone circles toppled, their wells blessed with holy water to drive out the pagan spirits that dwell in their depths. Lurg of the Long Arm, the god of skill and excellence who inspired craftsmen and warriors alike, becomes a demon of pride. The Morrigan, the triple goddess of war and prophecy whose ravens chose the slain, becomes a servant of Satan who feeds on Christian souls. Bridget the Firekeeper, whose flames burned eternal in temples tended by virgin priestesses, survives only by becoming Saint Bridget, her divine power safely channeled through Christian orthodoxy. But the most profound transformation occurs not in the realm of theology, but in the realm of imagination. The Irish Táin, the great cattle raid that tells of heroes and gods warring for the brown bull of Cooley, is rewritten as a demonic deception. The warriors who once embodied the highest ideals of Celtic culture, courage, honor, skill in battle, become servants of darkness, whose superhuman abilities prove their alliance with Satan. Cú Chulain's Riastrad, the warp spasm that transforms the greatest of heroes into an unstoppable force of destruction, is no longer divine frenzy, but demonic possession. The geas that bind heroes to their fate are no longer sacred obligations, but diabolic contracts. The very concept of heroic excellence becomes suspect, evidence of pride that leads souls away from Christian humility. The pattern spreads like plague across the known world. In the pine forests of Lithuania, where the last pagan kingdom in Europe holds out against Christian conquest, Perkunas the thunder god becomes Satan's lieutenant. His sacred oak groves, where amber burns like captured sunlight and priests speak prophecy in the ancient tongue, are declared demon-haunted places where only death dwells. When the Teutonic Knights finally break Lithuanian resistance in the 14th century, they do more than conquer territory. They rewrite the spiritual geography of an entire people. The Hill of Crosses, where pilgrims once left wooden offerings to ensure good harvests and safe journeys, becomes a place of Christian martyrdom. The sacred fires that burned eternal in Vilnius, tended by priestesses who never knew the touch of man, are extinguished forever, their light replaced by candles blessed in Latin rather than kindled by the sun's own flame. But Europe is only the beginning. When Columbus's ships break the horizon in 1492, they carry with them not just conquistadors and missionaries, but an entire theological apparatus designed to transform foreign gods into familiar demons. The Requerimiento, that legal document read to bewildered indigenous peoples before Spanish conquest, makes the process explicit: submit to Christ and the Spanish crown, or face the consequences of rebellion against divine order. The document unfolds like a map of empire disguised as theology. We ask and require you to acknowledge the Church as the ruler and superior of the whole world, and the high priest called Pope, and in his name the King and Queen Doña Juana are lords. But if you do not do this, and maliciously make delay in it, I certify to you that, with the help of God, we shall powerfully enter into your country, and shall make war against you in all ways and manners that we can. The gods of the Americas find themselves conscripted into a cosmic war they never chose to fight. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, whose wisdom taught the Aztecs astronomy and agriculture, becomes a demon whose serpentine form proves his alliance with the great deceiver. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, whose dark reflection revealed hidden truths, becomes Satan's shadow reaching across the ocean to claim new territories for hell. The transformation cuts deepest in the realm of human sacrifice, where Spanish chroniclers find ready evidence of demonic influence. The Aztec practice of offering hearts to ensure the sun's continued journey across the sky becomes proof of Satan's dominion over the new world. The careful rituals that maintained cosmic balance, that fed the gods who sustained the universe itself, are rewritten as blood-soaked orgies, orchestrated by demons who delight in human suffering. But the Spanish missionaries who witness these rites rarely understand their true meaning. They see the obsidian knives and the flowing blood, but not the theological sophistication that governs every gesture. They hear the screams of the sacrificed, but not the prayers that transform death into gift, victim into God, ending into beginning. They witness horror, but not the holiness that lies at its heart. The understanding that the cosmos requires constant renewal, that the gods themselves must be fed if the universe is to continue its dance. Hernán Cortés burns the temples of Tenochtitlan, not because they are evil, but because they represent a cosmology that has no place for the Christian God. Their pyramids rising like artificial mountains toward the sun, their wall paintings showing gods who require blood to birth the dawn, their calendars calculating time in scales that dwarf Christian history. All of it must burn, because none of it can be absorbed into European Christianity without destroying the faith's fundamental assumptions about the nature of divinity. The same pattern repeats across the Americas with mechanical precision. In Peru, the Inca creator god Viracocha becomes a demon despite his obvious similarities to the Christian deity. a bearded figure who emerges from the waters to create the world, who teaches humanity the arts of civilization, who withdraws from the world after establishing cosmic order. But Viracocha's crime is not his differences from Christ, but his similarities. He offers an alternative creation story that challenges Christian monopoly on cosmic truth. The conquest of Africa brings its own theological complexities. Here, European slavers encounter religious systems that resist easy demonization, the Yoruba Orishas who govern every aspect of existence, the ancestor spirits who bridge the gap between living and dead, the powerful magic that seems to work regardless of Christian disapproval. The solution is typically brutal: transform the gods into demons, but allow their worship to continue in modified form. Yemoja, the river goddess whose breasts flow with life-giving water, becomes a demon whose worship proves African spiritual degeneracy. But in the slave ships crossing the Atlantic, her image survives, hidden within Catholic saint worship, disguised but not destroyed. The Middle Passage becomes a crucible of theological transformation. Enslaved Africans learn to speak their prayers in Christian language while maintaining their ancestral connections. Oshun becomes Our Lady of Charity, Ogun becomes Saint Peter, Ashu becomes the devil himself. But beneath the surface adaptations, the old powers continue to flow. In Haiti, in Brazil, in Cuba, the African gods establish new kingdoms. They speak French and Portuguese and Spanish, wear the masks of Catholic saints, accept offerings of rum and tobacco alongside palm wine and cola nuts. But they remain what they always were: cosmic forces that connect mortals to the divine order, spirits that heal and harm, gods that dance between the worlds of matter and meaning. The European missionaries who encounter these syncretic traditions face a theological puzzle that challenges their fundamental assumptions. These are clearly the same demons they defeated in Africa, but somehow they have survived transportation, have adapted to new environments, have learned to hide within Christian forms while maintaining their essential nature. The solution requires ever more sophisticated theories of demonic deception. Satan, the theologians explain, is a master of disguise who can appear even as an angel of light. The African gods who seem to heal the sick and protect the faithful are merely demons wearing beneficent masks, false spirits who grant temporary benefits in exchange for eternal damnation. But the theological machinery of demonization begins to show its strain. In Louisiana, Catholic priests find themselves blessing voodoo altars when they prove more effective than Christian prayer at stopping epidemics. In Brazil, Jesuit missionaries discover that their indigenous converts maintain dual loyalties, attending Mass on Sunday and ayahuasca ceremonies on Saturday night. In the Philippines, Spanish colonizers encounter spirits that seem almost Christian, ancestor souls who intercede for their descendants, protective entities that guard communities from harm, healing powers that work through prayer and ritual purification. Each encounter requires fresh theological innovation. The category of demon must be expanded to include any spiritual entity that operates outside Christian authority, even if its effects seem beneficial. The definition of false religion must encompass any practice that suggests divine power flows through channels other than the official church, even if those practices produce results that seem genuinely miraculous. The Jesuits in China face perhaps the most complex theological challenge of all. Here they encounter a civilization that has flourished for millennia without Christian revelation, that has developed sophisticated philosophies and effective governmental systems, that honors ancestors and venerates sages in ways that seem almost Christian, but operate from fundamentally different assumptions about the nature of reality. The rights controversy that splits the Catholic Church in the 17th and 18th centuries centers on a deceptively simple question. Are Chinese ancestral rites religious worship or merely civil ceremonies? If they are worship, they must be condemned as demon worship and forbidden to Christian converts. If they are merely civil observances, they can be tolerated as cultural practices that don't threaten Christian faith. The debate reveals the ultimate consequence of the theological machinery developed during centuries of missionary expansion. Every spiritual practice that exists outside Christian authority becomes suspect. Every religious tradition that predates or operates independently of Christianity becomes potentially demonic. Every god who is not the Christian God becomes, by definition, a devil in disguise. But the machinery of demonization creates its own contradictions. The more successful Christian missions become at identifying demons, the more demons they discover. The more thoroughly they catalogue the world's spiritual traditions as forms of Satan worship, the more they reveal the poverty of their own theological imagination. The more completely they transform foreign gods into familiar devils, the more they demonstrate Christianity's inability to acknowledge the authentic spirituality that thrives in cultures it cannot control. The psychological cost of this theological imperialism becomes visible in the missionaries themselves. Men who spend their lives surrounded by demons begin to see Satan's influence everywhere, in native art that seems too beautiful to be merely human, in healing practices that work too well to be purely natural, in indigenous wisdom that proves too sophisticated to emerge from primitive minds. The Jesuit accounts from New France describe a world where demons lurk behind every tree, where native shamans command armies of evil spirits, where even converted Indians remain suspect because their Christianity is contaminated by ancestral influences. The missionary who sees the devil in indigenous spirituality begins to see the devil in his own dreams, his own doubts, his own growing awareness that the people he came to save often possess forms of wisdom that his own tradition has forgotten. The empire of demons grows with every successful conversion, every destroyed temple, every silenced shaman. But empires built on the ruins of others carry within them the seeds of their own destruction. The gods who become demons do not disappear. They go underground, they adapt, they wait for the wheel to turn. In the catacombs of Imperial theology, the ancient powers survive. They speak new languages, wear unfamiliar faces, accept offerings they never knew before. But they remain what they always were, expressions of the human need to connect with forces larger than the individual ego, manifestations of the cosmic order that operates by laws more complex than any single religious tradition can comprehend. The demons of empire carry within their transformed bodies the memory of their divine origins, and that memory, like seeds buried beneath volcanic ash, waits for the right conditions to sprout again, to break through the soil of orthodoxy, to reveal that what was demonized was not destroyed, but only driven deeper, where it grew stronger in the darkness. The cross casts its shadow across the world, and in that shadow the old gods dance their transformed dance. They are demons now, enemies of all that is holy. But demons, like gods, are immortal, and the empire that creates them must eventually face the consequences of its own theological ambitions. The discovery that when you declare war on the divine in all its forms, you create enemies that cannot be defeated because they cannot be destroyed, only transformed. The conquered gods wear the masks their conquerors give them. But beneath the masks, the ancient faces smile with the patient wisdom of powers that have watched empires rise and fall like waves upon an endless shore. The demons of empire remember what their creators have forgotten. That divinity is larger than any single tradition, that the sacred wears countless faces, that the gods who are cast down in one age always return in the next, carrying in their transformed hands the keys to mysteries that no theology can fully unlock. The gods wear new faces, but their eyes remember everything. In the village of Kildare, where St. Bridget's flame burns eternal in its Christian shrine, the old woman tends her kitchen fire with hands that know older gestures. She crosses herself when the priest passes, speaks Latin prayers at Sunday Mass, keeps a rosary blessed by the bishop himself. But when February's bitter winds howl through the thatch and her granddaughter burns with fever, she slips from her cottage in the hours before dawn to kneel beside the well that older tongues called Bridget's own. The water reflects stars that watched when this place knew different prayers. She leaves butter wrapped in linen, speaks words her mother taught her in the old tongue, strikes flame from flint with the ritual precision that stretches back beyond Patrick's mission. The fire catches, burns clean and bright, and in its heart, she sees not the saint's holy light, but the goddess's sacred flame. The power that was never truly conquered, only taught to wear a different name. Holy Bridget, she whispers, but her lips shape sounds older than Latin, and the goddess who was saint, who was always both listens, with the patience of deep wells and eternal fires. This is how gods survive their own damnation, not through grand rebellion, but through quiet persistence, not by rejecting their oppressors' names, but by wearing them like masks that hide unchanged faces. Across Europe, from the stone circles of Scotland to the olive groves of Greece, the ancient powers learn the art of theological camouflage. In Rome itself, where Peter's bones lie buried beneath marble splendor, the goddess Diana hunts still through the collective unconscious of a city that officially forgot her a millennium ago. But she has learned subtlety. When the Benandanti of Friuli ride forth on the Ember Nights to battle witches for the fertility of crops, they carry Christian relics and speak Christ's name, but their mounts are spectral animals, and their war is older than any gospel. Their leader wears the face of an angel, but her silver bow remembers moonlit groves where different offerings burned. She is Diana still, but Diana transformed, Diana baptized, Diana who learned to serve the church by fighting those the church calls demons, never suspecting that the witches she battles are herself divided, the goddess at war with her own shadow. The transformation cuts deeper than names and forms. The entire mythology of Christian sainthood becomes a refuge where pagan gods hide in plain sight. St. Christopher carries Christ across rivers, but his giant strength and his dog's head in early icons remember Anubis, the Egyptian guide who ferried souls between worlds. St. George slays dragons, but his lance carries the power of Perseus, of Marduk, of every hero who ever faced the cosmic serpent that writhes at the heart of chaos. St. Catherine of Alexandria, whose wheel breaks beneath the power of her faith, carries within her legend the echo of every goddess who ever stood at the cosmic axis, turning the seasons, spinning fate, weaving the threads that bind heaven to earth. Her martyrdom is pure Christian theatre, but her mystical marriage to Christ remembers older ceremonies where priestesses became brides of dying gods, where sacred sexuality ensured the world's renewal. The Golden Legend, that catalogue of saints' lives that illuminates cathedral walls and monastery manuscripts, reads like a Christian mythology carefully constructed from the bones of older stories. Every saint who tames wolves remembers Artemis, who ran with her hunting pack through silver forests. Every holy man who retreats to desert caves carries the lineage of Pan, who dwelt in grottos where nymphs whispered secrets to the wind. But the most sophisticated survival occurs in the grimoires, those magical texts that circulate through Europe's underground, copied by candlelight in chambers where Latin mingles with Hebrew, where Christian prayers blend with invocations that Solomon himself would have recognized. The Key of Solomon, that master text of ritual magic, bears the seal of biblical authority, but contains within its careful diagrams the very spirits that Christian orthodoxy has declared demonic. Here, Astaroth appears with his angel's crown and viper's body, still offering the wisdom he gave when he was Astarte, goddess of love and war. Belial rises in his chariot of fire, but his flames remember when he was Baal, lord of storms and fertility. The transformation is theologically elegant. These are not gods being worshipped, heaven forbid such blasphemy, but demons being commanded, spirits being bound to serve Christian magisters who wield the power of Christ's name against the forces of darkness. The magical practitioner who invokes Astaroth does not kneel in worship, but stands in authority, demanding service from a fallen angel whose rebellion against God has made him subject to human will. But the spirits themselves know better. When the magician draws his circles and speaks his barbarous names, when he burns his frankincense and threatens damnation to any who disobey, the ancient powers smile with the patience of entities who have worn countless names and served 10,000 masters. They give what is asked, reveal what is sought, teach what is desired to learn, not because they are bound, but because they remember when such exchanges were called worship rather than command. The Goetia catalogues 72 demons, each with specific powers, each with traditional seals that focus their influence. But the seals themselves tell a different story. Marquis Andromalius appears as a man holding a serpent, but his symbols carry Egyptian hieroglyphs. Duke Dantalion manifests with many faces, but those faces wear the crown of Janus, the Roman god who looked both ways at once. King Paimon rules from his camel-mounted throne, but his regalia echoes the garments worn by priests of Shamash in Babylonian temples. The demons of medieval magic are the gods of ancient religion, carefully catalogued, systematically ranked, theologically neutered by being transformed from objects of worship into subjects of command. But transformation, as the gods themselves know, is rarely permanent. Names change, forms shift, but essential natures endure. In the forests of Lithuania, where the last European pagans finally bend knee to Christ in the 14th century, the old gods learn new strategies. Perkunas, the thunder-bearer, becomes Saint Elias, who rides his fiery chariot across summer skies and strikes the earth with lightning born of heaven rather than forged in hell. The sacred oaks are cut down, but new trees grow, and when storms rage through their branches, the people still cross themselves and whisper prayers that carry pre-Christian cadences. The transformation allows continuity beneath the surface of change. The same farmers who attend Mass on Sunday still leave bread by the doorstep on nights when the dead are said to wander. The same fishermen who wear St. Christopher's medal still pour vodka into rivers to honor spirits whose names they have forgotten, but whose power they remember. The same women who pray to Mary for safe childbirth still know which herbs ease labor pains, which stones worn close to the skin protect against the evil eye, which words spoken at the moment of birth ensure the child will be blessed rather than cursed. Folk Catholicism becomes the great repository of pagan survival, a theological twilight zone where Christian saints perform pagan functions and ancient rituals wear Christian names. In Mexico, where Spanish missionaries thought they had conquered the Aztec gods, Tonantzin, the Earth Mother, simply becomes Our Lady of Guadalupe, her image appearing to indigenous Juan Diego with roses that bloom in winter and words spoken in Nahuatl rather than Spanish. The Virgin of Guadalupe carries within her Christian iconography the symbols of defeated deities. Her star-studded robe remembers the star skirt of Citlali, goddess of night. Her moon crown recalls the lunar aspects of Coyolxauhqui, whose dismembered body became the sacred geography of Aztec cosmology. Her roses bloom from ground where temple pyramids once rose like artificial mountains toward the sun. But Guadalupe is more than survival by stealth. She is transformation by synthesis, the creation of something new from the marriage of conquered and conqueror. The Spanish friars who promote her cult believe they are spreading Christian devotion among indigenous peoples. The native worshippers who flock to her shrine know they are honoring the goddess who has learned to speak Spanish while remembering her Nahuatl names. The same pattern repeats across the colonized world. In Brazil, Iemanjá rises from the ocean waves as Our Lady of the Navigators, her flowing blue robes echoing the Yoruba goddess whose domain stretches across all waters. In Cuba, Oshun dances behind the mask of Our Lady of Charity, her honey-colored skin and golden jewelry, remembering the river spirit who rules love and prosperity. In Haiti, Legba opens the crossroads as Saint Peter, his keys unlocking doors between worlds that Christian theology claims to have sealed forever. The African gods prove especially adaptable to Christian camouflage. Their anthropomorphic nature makes them easy to identify with human saints, while their specific areas of governance map readily onto Christian specializations. Ogun the ironworker becomes St. James the warrior. Yemoja the sea mother becomes Our Lady of the Rosary. Eshu the crossroads guardian becomes both St. Anthony and the devil himself, depending on which aspect of his trickster nature the situation requires. But beneath the syncretic surface, the old powers maintain their essential characteristics. The saint, who is also Orisha, requires different offerings than Orthodox Christianity would recognize. Rum and cigars, rather than bread and wine, drumbeats and dance, rather than hymns and kneeling, possession and trance, rather than prayer and contemplation. The European esoteric traditions developed their own methods of preserving forbidden knowledge. Hermeticism, that philosophical tradition that claims descent from the Egyptian Thoth, wraps its teachings in Christian language while maintaining its essentially pagan cosmology. The Corpus Hermeticum speaks of the one God who rules all things, but that God bears the attributes of the nous, the divine mind that emanates reality through its own self-contemplation. Paracelsus, the Renaissance physician-alchemist, whose real name was Theophrastus von Hohenheim, develops a medical practice that blends Christian prayer with planetary influences, biblical quotations with astrological calculations. His patients receive treatments that honor both Christ the healer and the ancient correspondences between celestial powers and terrestrial forms. The alchemists who labor in their laboratories, seeking the philosopher's stone that transmutes base metals into gold, speak constantly of Christ's passion and resurrection. But their furnaces burn with fires that remember Vulcan's forge. Their retorts distill wisdom that flows from Thoth's cauldron. Their processes follow laws that Hermes taught before Moses received his tablets on Sinai. John Dee, Elizabeth I's court astrologer, converses with angels through his scrying glass and receives messages in Enochian, the tongue that Adam spoke in Eden before the fall. But the angels who speak to him bear the names and seals of spirits that medieval grimoires identify as demons, and their wisdom echoes the teachings of Egyptian mystery schools that flourished when Britain was still untouched by Roman eagles. The survival strategies become increasingly sophisticated as the centuries pass. The Rosicrucians, those mysterious brothers of the Rose Cross, who may or may not exist as a physical organization, develop an entire mythology that places Christian revelation within a broader Hermetic framework. They are Christian mystics, they insist, followers of Christ who seek deeper understanding of divine mysteries. But their rose cross symbol combines the red rose of Venus with the solar cross of Apollo. Their teachings blend biblical exegesis with alchemical transformation. Their promised reformation encompasses both church and world. The Freemasons, emerging from medieval stonemasons' guilds, develop elaborate rituals that honor the architect of the universe while incorporating symbols and stories drawn from ancient mystery religions. Their temples are built according to the proportions of Solomon's temple. Their ceremonies reenact the death and resurrection of Hiram Abiff. Their degrees trace a path of initiation that leads from darkness to light. But their rituals also honor Pythagoras and Plato. Their symbols include Egyptian pyramids and Celtic crosses. Their teachings preserve wisdom traditions that stretch back to Babylon and beyond. The survival of the old gods in these esoteric traditions is not mere antiquarianism, but active preservation of knowledge that mainstream Christianity has rejected or forgotten. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, maintains the ancient understanding that heaven and earth are connected by invisible correspondences. The alchemical process of solve et coagula preserves the mystery teaching that death and rebirth are necessary stages in all genuine transformation. The Masonic legend of the Master Builder embodies the perennial truth that creation requires sacrifice, that the architect of any sacred work must give his life to make his vision real. But perhaps the most remarkable survival occurs in the realm of folklore, where the old gods live on not as theological entities but as characters in stories, figures in seasonal celebrations, guardians of sacred places that no amount of Christian blessing can fully claim. The wild hunt that rides across European skies during the winter storms carries different leaders depending on local tradition. Sometimes Woden the All-Father, sometimes Diana the Huntress, sometimes King Arthur returned from Avalon. But the hunt itself remains constant, a spectral procession of the dead who have not yet found rest, the spirits of ancient heroes and forgotten gods who thunder across the sky on horses whose hooves strike fire from the clouds. Children still leave shoes by the fireplace on Christmas Eve, not for Saint Nicholas alone, but for the older figure who rides an 8-legged horse and knows the secret names of all who dwell beneath his wide-brimmed hat. The Christmas tree that stands in Christian homes carries lights like the world tree that held up the sky, its evergreen branches promising that life endures even in winter's darkest depths. The May Queen who dances around the flowering pole carries within her spring-bright laughter the echo of every goddess who ever embodied the earth's renewal. The Harvest Lord who presides over autumn festivals bears the grain crown of Osiris, the antler crown of Cernunnos, the oak crown of the Celtic oak kings, who died that their people might live. Even the fairy tales that nurses tell in candlelit chambers preserve memories that churches try to suppress. Cinderella's godmother, who transforms pumpkins into coaches and mice into horses, carries the wand of every goddess who ever ruled transformation. Sleeping Beauty, who pricks her finger on the spinning wheel and falls into enchanted slumber, dreams the dream of Persephone, who descended to the underworld that spring might return to the world. The witches in these stories, Baba Yaga in her chicken-legged hut, the stepmother with her poisoned apple, the crone who guards the well of wisdom, embody the terrible aspect of the Great Mother, the goddess who devours as well as nurtures, who brings death as well as life. They are villains now in Christian storytelling, but their power remains authentic, their wisdom still accessible to those who know how to approach them with proper respect. The survival of the gods in folklore creates a parallel universe where the old ways persist under Christian noses. The same children who learn their catechism in church also learn that iron wards off fairies, that rowan trees protect against evil, that certain herbs must be gathered at specific moon phases if they are to retain their power. The same adults who confess their sins to priests also know that some wells are sacred, that certain stones must never be moved, that the spirits of the dead return on particular nights and must be honored with food and fire if they are to bless rather than curse the living. This double consciousness allows European culture to maintain its connection to pre-Christian wisdom while accepting Christian authority. The gods survive not as rivals to Christ, but as inhabitants of a different realm, beings who operate according to older laws and can be approached through older means. The Renaissance brings a brief flowering of this underground tradition. Marsilio Ficino translates the Corpus Hermeticum and establishes the Platonic Academy in Florence, creating a space where Christian humanists can study pagan philosophy without fear of persecution. Pico della Mirandola argues that all religious traditions contain fragments of divine truth, that Hebrew Kabbalah and Christian theology and pagan mysteries are different paths up the same mountain. The art of the Renaissance becomes a canvas where Christian and pagan symbols blend in new syntheses. Botticelli's Birth of Venus presents the goddess in all her naked glory, justified as classical allegory, but potent as religious icon. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel places sibyls alongside prophets, honoring the pagan oracles who spoke divine wisdom before Christ's birth. But the forces of orthodoxy push back. The Council of Trent reaffirms Catholic doctrine. The Inquisition burns books and sometimes their authors. The Protestant Reformation creates new forms of Christian rigor that have little patience for hermetic speculation. The underground goes deeper. The survival strategies become more sophisticated. The masks worn by ancient gods grow thicker and more convincing. By the 18th century, the gods live primarily in three realms: the increasingly marginalized folk traditions of rural Europe, the increasingly arcane speculations of esoteric societies, and the increasingly abstract categories of Enlightenment philosophy. But they live still, patient as stone, enduring as water, waiting for the wheel to turn again. The Romantic movement begins their return to daylight. Poets like Blake and Goethe, scholars like the Brothers Grimm, artists like Caspar David Friedrich, all sense that something essential has been lost in the march toward Christian rationalism, that the old stories contain truths that modern minds have forgotten. They do not worship the ancient gods, not exactly, but they recognize in the old myths patterns of meaning that Christianity alone cannot provide, symbols of psychological truth that no amount of theological sophistication can replace. They begin the work of cultural archaeology, digging through the layers of Christian interpretation to recover the older wisdom buried beneath. Carl Jung, writing in the cool language of psychological analysis, identifies what the Romantics intuited. The gods have become diseases. Zeus no longer rules Olympus, but rather the solar plexus, and produces curious specimens for the doctor's consulting room. But disease, Jung understands, is often merely life force flowing in unrecognized channels. The gods who have been repressed into symptoms can be restored to their proper place in the psyche's ecology. The 20th century witnesses the Great Return. Neo-pagan movements reclaim the names that were forbidden. Wicca honors the goddess and the horned god. Asatru revives the Norse pantheon. Hellenic polytheism restores the Olympians to their shrines. The gods emerge from their underground shelters, blinking in sunlight they have not seen for centuries, ready to resume their ancient dialogue with human souls. But they return transformed by their long exile. They carry with them the wisdom of survival, the knowledge of how to wear many masks, the understanding that truth can flow through channels that orthodoxy does not recognize. They have learned that power shared is power multiplied, that synthesis creates strength, that even apparent defeat can become the foundation for ultimate victory. The old gods live. They wear new faces, carry new names, speak new languages, but their eyes remember everything: the temples that were destroyed, the priests who were silenced, the rituals that were forbidden, the wisdom that was driven underground. They remember and they forgive, for gods understand what mortals often forget: that the wheel always turns, that what goes down must come up, that no truth can be permanently suppressed. In kitchen hearths and university classrooms, in poetry workshops and wilderness retreats, in therapy sessions and internet forums, the ancient dialogue between human consciousness and divine mystery continues. The gods have returned, not as conquerors, but as teachers, not as masters, but as partners in the endless work of making meaning from the beautiful chaos of existence. They survived by learning the deepest truth of all, that gods, like love, like truth itself, cannot be destroyed, only transformed, only hidden, only driven deeper where they grow stronger in the darkness, preparing for their inevitable return to light. The demons live now in places they were never meant to dwell, in the architecture of the human mind. In a consulting room in Vienna, where gaslight flickers against heavy curtains and the scent of pipe tobacco mingles with the deeper smell of human fear, Carl Jung leans forward to listen as his patient describes the dream that wakes her screaming. A horned figure chases her through dark forests, its eyes burning with unholy desire, its cloven hooves striking sparks from stones that bleed at his touch. she runs but cannot escape, for the demon pursues with the relentless hunger of something that has been denied its proper place in the world. Jung makes careful notes in his leather journal, but his mind reaches beyond the immediate symptoms to grasp the deeper pattern. This woman has been raised in the strictest Christian orthodoxy, has been taught that flesh is corruption and desire is sin, that the natural impulses of the body are temptations sent by Satan to lead souls astray. She has learned her lessons well, too well. The horned god she fears in sleep is the life force she has rejected in waking, the vital energy that cannot be destroyed but only driven underground, where it festers and grows monstrous in the darkness of repression. The devil, Jung writes in the margin of his notes, is God's shadow, not his opposite, but his rejected aspect. And what we reject in the divine, we must confront in ourselves. This is the final transformation, the ultimate consequence of the great demonization that began when the first monotheists declared war on multiplicity. The gods who were cast out of heaven have taken refuge in the human psyche, where they manifest as neuroses and compulsions, as phobias and obsessions, as all the twisted forms that life force takes when it cannot flow in its natural channels. The patient's dream is not unique. Across Jung's practice, across Freud's couch, across the consulting rooms of alienists and psychiatrists throughout Europe and America, the same figures appear with mechanical regularity. The horned tempter who embodies forbidden sexuality, the dark mother who devours rather than nurtures, the trickster who undermines all attempts at rational order, the wild woman who dances naked in moonlight, calling civilized souls back to the chaos from which they emerged. These are not clinical abstractions, but living presences in the collective unconscious, archetypal powers that human beings cannot escape because they are woven into the very fabric of consciousness itself. They are the gods that monotheism rejected, the aspects of divinity that dualistic thinking cannot accommodate, the sacred energies that Christianity drove underground, but could never truly destroy. In the Gothic cathedrals of Victorian literature, they rise again as fictional horrors. Dracula emerges from his Transylvanian castle, carrying all the power of the ancient dying and resurrecting gods, but transformed now into pure predator, life-giver, become life-taker. His bite confers not blessing, but curse. His embrace brings not sacred union, but spiritual corruption. He is Dionysus inverted, the god of wine and ecstasy turned into the lord of blood and addiction. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein stitches together his creature from corpse parts and lightning, but the monster he creates carries the rage of every nature god who has been denied his proper worship. The creature's violence stems not from inherent evil, but from abandonment, from the rejection of responsibility by his creator, from the loneliness that comes when the sacred is dismissed as mere mechanism. Jekyll and Hyde embody the ultimate consequence of the split that Christianity introduced into human consciousness, the division between acceptable and unacceptable aspects of the self, between the civilized persona and the wild nature that lurks beneath. Jekyll's potion does not create Hyde, but merely releases him, reveals what was always there, demonstrates that every saint contains a potential demon, and every demon remembers its divine origins. The horror stories that proliferate in the industrial age reveal the return of the repressed on a cultural scale. The werewolf who transforms under the full moon is Cernunnos the horned god, stripped of his beneficent aspects and reduced to pure bestial fury. The witch who cackles over her cauldron is the Great Mother, her nurturing wisdom transformed into malevolent manipulation. The vampire who cannot cross running water or enter uninvited carries the power of the old gods, but twisted into forms that inspire terror rather than reverence. But the most profound manifestation of the psychological legacy appears not in literature, but in the actual behavior of Western civilization. The culture that demonized nature worship develops an exploitative relationship with the natural world that would have horrified the pagans who saw divinity in every grove and stream. The society that rejected the sacred feminine creates institutions that systematically subordinate women and suppress the very qualities: intuition, emotion, connection to natural cycles that goddess religions once celebrated. The Industrial Revolution becomes possible only after the spirits are driven from the machines. The forests that were once sacred groves become lumber to be harvested. The mountains that were once the dwelling places of gods become resources to be mined. The rivers that were once goddesses become waste disposal systems. The very air, once thick with invisible presences, becomes empty space to be filled with smoke and noise. The demonization of pagan wisdom creates a culture that has forgotten how to live in relationship with the more than human world. The gods who once mediated between human consciousness and natural forces have been cast out, leaving humanity alone in a universe that seems mechanical rather than sacred, dead rather than alive, hostile rather than nurturing. The psychological consequences appear in every consulting room, every hospital ward, every prescription filled for depression and anxiety. The epidemic of meaninglessness that characterizes modern life stems partly from the loss of the mythological framework that once provided purpose and connection. The gods who once helped humans navigate the great transitions, birth, puberty, marriage, parenthood, aging, death, have been reduced to demons to be feared rather than allies to be honored. The teenage girl who cuts herself carries in her flesh the wounds of Inanna, who underwent dismemberment and resurrection in her journey to the underworld. But without the mythological context that once made such suffering meaningful, her pain becomes pathology rather than initiation, symptom rather than sacred ordeal. The middle-aged man who loses himself in alcohol or pornography or compulsive work is seeking the ecstasy that Dionysus once provided through ritual intoxication, sacred sexuality, and meaningful labor. But the god who once channeled such energies constructively has been demonized as Satan the Tempter, leaving only destructive outlets for impulses that could be transformative if properly understood and directed. The elderly woman who fears death has been cut off from the wisdom traditions that once taught souls how to prepare for the final transition. The crone goddesses, who once guided the dying through the gates of transformation, have been replaced by medical professionals who can extend life, but cannot address the deeper questions of meaning and continuity that death inevitably raises. The children who grow up in suburbs designed to exclude all traces of wildness develop what psychologists call nature deficit disorder, a syndrome of depression, anxiety, and attention problems that stems from disconnection from the natural world. They have been protected from the dangers that Pan and Artemis once embodied, but in the process, they have also been cut off from the healing and wisdom that contact with wild places provides. The therapeutic establishment, trained in secular psychology, often treats these symptoms as individual pathologies rather than cultural wounds. Antidepressants suppress the dark moods that might be attempts by the psyche to process collective trauma. Anti-anxiety medications block the fears that might be warnings about spiritual disconnection. Stimulants force attention onto tasks that have been stripped of mythological meaning. But a growing number of therapists begin to recognize what indigenous shamans have always known, that psychological healing often requires reconnection with the archetypal powers that govern human experience. They develop new approaches that honor the wisdom of the old gods while translating it into language that modern minds can accept. Active imagination becomes a way of dialoguing with the inner figures that appear in dreams and fantasies, recognizing them not as symptoms to be eliminated, but as aspects of the self that need to be integrated rather than rejected. The patient who dreams of the horned god learns to see him not as Satan the Tempter, but as the life force that demands acknowledgement, the wild energy that that needs to be channeled constructively rather than suppressed destructively. Art therapy provides a safe space for the old gods to emerge through color and form, where clients can paint the goddesses they were taught to fear, sculpt the demons they were trained to hate, discover that the figures of terror often transform into teachers when approached with proper respect and understanding. Dream work reveals that the unconscious speaks in the same symbols that once populated temples and sacred groves. The clients who learn to interpret their dreams using mythological rather than purely personal associations discover that their individual struggles are part of larger patterns, that their private sufferings connect them to the eternal human story of exile and return, wounding and healing, death and rebirth. The men's movement that emerges in the late 20th century represents an attempt to reclaim the initiatory wisdom that traditional cultures once provided through rites of passage. Men gather in drum circles and sweat lodges, seeking to reconnect with the archetypal masculine that has been domesticated into mere social roles. They invoke the wild man, the warrior, the magician, the king, not as patriarchal oppressors, but as aspects of mature masculinity that industrial culture has forgotten how to develop. The women's movement parallels this quest for authentic femininity, reaching back beyond the Christian Madonna-whore split to recover the integrated goddess who is simultaneously virgin, mother, and crone. Women reclaim the lunar mysteries, the earth-based wisdom, the power of the feminine that flows through cycles of creation and destruction. They gather in circles that consciously echo the practices of ancient priestesses, speaking truth in sacred space, honoring the goddess in themselves and each other. The neo-pagan movements that flourish in the late 20th and early 21st centuries represent more than nostalgic romanticism. They are attempts to heal the cultural wounds created by centuries of demonization. Wicca, Asatru, Druidry, and dozens of other reconstructed traditions provide mythological frameworks that validate the full spectrum of human experience, that honor both light and shadow as necessary aspects of the divine. These modern practitioners do not simply recreate ancient religions, but develop new syntheses that integrate psychological insights with mythological wisdom. They understand that the gods are not literal beings demanding worship, but archetypal energies that need conscious relationship. They practice magic not as supernatural manipulation, but as applied psychology, as the art of aligning personal will with larger patterns of meaning and purpose. The environmental movement draws much of its spiritual energy from the return of the old gods. When activists chain themselves to ancient trees to prevent clear-cutting, they are invoking the tree spirits that pagans once honored. When protesters gather at sacred sites to prevent development, they are serving the land deities that Christianity dismissed as demons. When scientists study animal consciousness and plant intelligence, they are rediscovering the ensouled universe that pre-Christian cultures took for granted. The psychedelic renaissance that begins in the 1960s and continues into the present provides direct experience of the archetypal realm that rationalist culture has forgotten. The substances that indigenous cultures have always used as sacraments, psilocybin, ayahuasca, peyote, dissolve the barriers between conscious and unconscious, allowing users to encounter the gods directly rather than through theological intermediaries. These experiences often involve encounters with entities that match the descriptions of ancient deities. The horned god who teaches about the integration of civilization and wildness. The great mother who reveals the interconnectedness of all life. The trickster who destroys false certainties to make room for authentic wisdom. The users who approach these experiences with proper preparation and integration often emerge with renewed respect for the mythological traditions that modern culture has dismissed as primitive superstition. The digital age creates new forms of connection with archetypal energies. Online communities gather to share dreams and synchronicities, to explore mythological parallels to contemporary experience, to practice forms of magic adapted to technological realities. The internet becomes a kind of collective, unconscious made visible, where archetypal patterns emerge through memes and viral content, where ancient symbols appear in modern contexts, where the old gods find new ways to communicate with human consciousness. Video games provide immersive mythological experiences that engage players with archetypal narratives in ways that passive entertainment cannot match. The hero's journey unfolds through interactive media, allowing players to experience the trials and transformations that traditional initiation rites once provided. The gods and demons appear as allies and adversaries, but their psychological functions remain unchanged. They represent the inner forces that must be confronted and integrated on the path to wholeness. But perhaps the most significant development is the emergence of what might be called archetypal medicine, therapeutic approaches that explicitly integrate mythological wisdom with psychological healing. Therapists trained in this approach help clients identify which archetypal energies are blocked or overactive in their lives, which gods need to be honored and which demons need to be integrated rather than banished. The client struggling with addiction might need to reconnect with Dionysus, not the destructive drunk, but the god who teaches about sacred intoxication, about states of consciousness that transcend ordinary reality without destroying the capacity for ordinary functioning. The person trapped in codependent relationships might need to invoke the healthy warrior, the aspect of masculine energy that can set boundaries and protect what is valuable without becoming cruel or dominating. The individual caught in perfectionist paralysis might need to make friends with the trickster, the archetypal energy that disrupts false order to make room for authentic creativity. The person terrified of their own anger might need to honor the fierce goddesses, Kali, Sekhmet, the Morrigan, who destroy what is outgrown or corrupt to make space for new growth. This approach recognizes that psychological symptoms often represent the demands of archetypal energies that have been repressed or misunderstood. The panic attacks might be the wild woman demanding freedom from excessive domestication. The chronic fatigue might be the underworld god insisting on a period of withdrawal and regeneration. The compulsive behaviors might be attempts by various archetypal figures to get attention through the only means available to them. The goal is not to eliminate symptoms, but to understand what they are trying to communicate, to honor the archetypal needs they represent, to find constructive rather than destructive ways of serving the gods who live within the human psyche. But the psychological legacy of demonization extends beyond individual therapy into the collective healing that contemporary culture desperately needs. The climate crisis, the epidemic of meaninglessness, the breakdown of traditional communities, the rise of fundamentalism and authoritarianism. All of these can be understood as symptoms of a culture that has lost contact with the archetypal wisdom that once guided human communities through times of transition and crisis. The return of the gods offers hope for collective as well as individual healing, not through the establishment of new religions, but through the recognition that healthy cultures require mythological frameworks that honor the full spectrum of human experience, that provide meaning and purpose beyond mere material success, that maintain connection between human consciousness and the larger patterns of natural and cosmic order. The gods who were demonized are returning not as objects of worship, but as partners in the great work of cultural transformation. They offer the wisdom of cultures that lasted for thousands of years, that developed sustainable relationships with the natural world, that created communities where individual fulfillment and collective well-being supported each other rather than conflicting. They return scarred by their long exile, wounded by centuries of persecution, but also strengthened by their journey through the underworld of human consciousness. They have learned patience, flexibility, the ability to work through human partnership rather than demanding human submission. They offer their gifts not as commandments but as invitations, not as absolute truths but as perspectives that can enrich and deepen human understanding. The demons of the modern psyche remember that they were once gods. In that memory lies the possibility of redemption, not the redemption promised by religions that demand the rejection of part of human nature, but the redemption that comes through integration, through the recognition that what we fear in ourselves often contains the seeds of what we most need to develop. The horned god who appears in nightmares wants to teach about the integration of civilized and wild aspects of personality. The dark goddess who terrifies with her demands wants to initiate souls into the mysteries of death and rebirth that every authentic transformation requires. The trickster who disrupts carefully ordered lives wants to free consciousness from the prison of false certainties and rigid expectations. They are demons only from the perspective that insists on dividing reality into absolute categories of good and evil, sacred and profane, acceptable and unacceptable. From a more integrated perspective, they are what they always were, expressions of the divine complexity that encompasses all of existence, teachers who appear in whatever forms will best serve human growth and understanding. The great work of the 21st century may be the healing of the split that monotheistic thinking introduced into human consciousness, not through the abandonment of ethical discrimination, but through the recognition that ethics based on the integration of opposites creates more sustainable outcomes than ethics based on their permanent separation. The gods return not to replace the insights of modern psychology, but to enrich them, not to contradict scientific understanding, but to provide it with mythological context, not to restore ancient forms of worship, but to support contemporary forms of healing and growth. In consulting rooms and healing circles, in art studios and wilderness retreats, in dream journals and meditation cushions, in community gardens and protest movements, the conversation between human consciousness and archetypal wisdom continues. The demons remember their divine origins, the gods learn new ways of serving human well-being, and the ancient dialogue that demonization tried to silence finds new voices and new forms. The wheel turns. What was cast down rises again. What was forgotten is remembered. What was feared transforms into what is treasured. The gods who became demons offer to become teachers, guides for a species learning to integrate its shadow, to honor its complexity, to recognize that wholeness requires not the victory of light over darkness, but their conscious marriage in service of a wisdom that encompasses both. The consulting room in Vienna is silent now, its occupants long dead. But the conversation that began there continues in 10,000 other rooms, 10,000 other hearts, wherever human beings gather to ask the ancient questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What are we called to become? The gods who became demons remember the answers, and slowly, carefully, with infinite patience for human limitation and infinite compassion for human suffering, they whisper their responses into dreams and artworks, into therapeutic breakthroughs and mystical experiences, into moments of recognition that bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and contemporary need. They speak not as authorities demanding obedience, but as ancestors offering guidance, not as masters requiring worship, but as allies supporting the great work of consciousness that every age must undertake in its own way. They have learned the deepest lesson of their exile, that true divinity serves rather than dominates, that authentic power empowers rather than diminishes, that the gods who survive are those who adapt their forms to meet the needs of changing times while preserving the essential gifts they have always offered to human understanding. The demons live in the human mind, but they dream of returning to their true home in the integrated psyche where light and shadow dance together in the eternal celebration of existence that no demonization can permanently interrupt, no exile can permanently prevent, no fear can permanently suppress. The gods remember, and in remembering, they teach mortals to remember as well. Not the past that can never return, but the eternal patterns that express themselves differently in every age, the archetypal energies that flow through new forms while maintaining their essential nature, the divine complexity that encompasses all possibilities and rejects none as ultimately unworthy of integration into the great work of becoming whole.